Welcome, members. We meet again, another meeting of the PAC. We are having a follow-up meeting, as you'll be aware, with the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, Investment and Commerce, as we had asked for some additional information from the ministry, and so we can work on completing that ministry today and ensuring that we move on to the Ministry of National Security and the Ministry of Justice next week. So, welcome, members. We are half an hour late, but I welcome each member to the meeting. Apologies for absence. I only have an apology from Member Holness. Are there any other apologies?
Chairman, Member Siblis said he'd be late.
Okay. Thank you, members. Late also? All right, so Member Morrison also. We move on to item 5, new business. Members, before we invite the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce in, members would remember that we asked for some additional information from some ministries. Those additional reports have been tabled. Well, some at the last meeting. It was also sent out by soft copy by the clerk from the Ministry of Transport and Mining, and we got one also from NEPA, which is the status of beach rehabilitation program. I would take it that members have taken a look. There was a third one, which was HART, which HART is to come and appear in front of the committee. But I am urging members to take a look at the reports so that we can decide if it is that we bring back these agencies to the PAC for follow-up deliberations. This is the JUTC one and the Montego Bay Metro, and we have here the one with the beach. But just an observation to do with the beach rehabilitation program. A little bit taken back at the information that was sent to us, because what it is giving the impression that these are new programs. Well, the one for Negril has been delayed because they said that there was some objection by stakeholders, but then there has not been any further movement towards that project. And the one for Helsha, terms of reference is now being sent out. There are now procurement for consultancy, but this has been at NEPA and at the different agencies for a number of years. I can remember the first time I sat in this committee, the Helsha, the grind was a matter at hand. And to see that we are now restarting the wheel is a bit of a disappointment for me and in this report. So I'll urge members to look at it, at that one, and then for us to then decide when we come to the next sitting to have a conversation on it to decide if we do bring back NEPA and the agencies involved, the PIOJ and the other agencies involved in the beach rehabilitation program. One for the JUTC, we had asked them to do a comparative pricing to see if there are any benefits out there to JUTC putting out a tender for the purchase of tires. And the report has come back to us Again, it has come to us with a lot of information and comparative pricing. I was a little bit taken aback by some of the opinion of the permanent secretary or acting permanent secretary in this one, in her judgment of why it is that private entities price the way that they do. For one, I don't think that it is in her place for her to make the comments that she did in the report. What we wanted to know is if there are any benefits to the JUTC in putting the purchase of tires out to tender. So I'll urge members to read this report. But also of concern is the report on the operations of Montego Bay Metro Company Limited. In the report here, it is showing that the Montego Bay Metro is in the need of 18 buses and only have 5 operating. Up to yesterday, it was 4 operating. They've moved from 18 routes to only 5 routes. They're showing that they need a complement of a minimum of 13 buses. The report itself is showing that some of the things that they say they would do to mitigate the losses and increase revenues, I don't see it working in the interest of the Montego Bay Metro. So I think this is one that also has to be looked at. They said that there's a limited availability of buses to operate the various routes, the frequency of breakdown of buses, the lack of adequate spare parts, as some of the issues that is affecting the Montego Bay Metro. But in this year's budget, there's some $250+ million in the budget for rehabilitation of buses for the Montego Bay Metro. But I don't see that as part of their rationalization, cost-saving measures or recommendation by the company to increase the number of buses. So these are some of the things that we would need to find out. So I'm again urging members to just take a look at these reports. Makes no sense that we have asked for additional information. When we get them, we do not read the reports and then we move on as if the matter is closed. So I'm asking members to read so that when we come next week, we can at least agree on a time frame on when we bring back these agencies to answer the questions that may derive from the additional reports. All right, any member have anything to add? Member Jackson, no?
I will advise on the letter regarding the Elsha matter. A reason being, I want to believe that there might be a change in scope. What you said was correct about the groin, that I had attempted to get repair from my tourism allocation budget, and it got scrapped by the TPDCO earlier on, and the allocation was not used. Got it back on the table. We had to have the design for the groin respec. That was done, and the whole thing started over, and we end up with delays after delays. There is a bigger challenge because, the truth be told, the scope of that groin was limited, but it only represented what I could do with the funding that I had. The Ministry of Tourism was asked, and the Prime Minister, to assist because of the funding which is required for the scope of work to be done. So that I will revisit and then report back.
Yeah. And I think in the report, to be fair, is that they have said that they have new source of funding. Hence why PIOJ is the
yes. It's a massive
agency.
project.
Yeah. right? But you know, it shows the importance. The report itself speaks of the importance of getting this project underway, because it states that at least 13% of the fish that is caught nationally comes from that
and
beach.
the entire shoreline around the
Exactly.
around the fishing beach is threatened.
And there are some 1,400 fisher folks that will be affected
by
it. So it is something that we're hoping that is not another start and stop. So that's why I urge members to read the report carefully and let us have a conversation on it.
Do agree, Chair.
All right, members, we invite the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce in. Good morning, Mrs. Bent Templar. Welcome again, and welcome to the team. Thank you again for agreeing to reappear so that we can complete the deliberations properly and for the additional information that was sent. I'm not sure if you want to do any opening statements, and then we can move forward.
Not this morning, Chairman, but perhaps just to introduce the team that I have with me.
Sorry, madam.
1 second.
On a point of order, Mr. Chairman. I know I am getting old, but I don't recall you going through the minutes. Sorry.
So, member. No, you're correct. The minutes, we're going to defer, putting to the committee really to defer the minutes to the next meeting, as the clerk had about 3 other committees that she was also dealing with and had not completed. And I said
so
to her,
move, Mr. Chairman.
You're more than welcome. Thank you. I'm glad he said it and not me. Yeah. Thank you very much, member. Yes, Madam Temple.
Thank you, Chairman. I just would take the opportunity to just introduce the team that I have with me. So I have with me Ms. Michelle Parkins, Chief Technical Director.
Just swing the mic around a little bit, so yeah.
I have with me Ms. Michelle Parkins, Chief Technical Director in the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce. Mr. Carl Hart, who is Senior Director, Policy Planning, Projects and Research in the Ministry. Mr. Oral Shaw, who is the Principal Director for the MSME Division. And Mrs. Sutherland Reed, Senior Legal Officer as well. From the agencies, Ms. Valerie Vieira, Chief Executive Officer of JBDC, and she has with her Mr. Harold Davis, who is the Deputy CEO. We also have with us Ms. Faith Graham, and she is the Executive Director of Acting for the Cannabis Licensing Authority, and with her is Mr. Howard Dawkins, He's Director of Finance and Accounts for the CLA. Ms. Judith Ramlogan, Chief Executive Officer, Companies Office of Jamaica. Ms. Dan Edwards, President of JAMPRO, as well as Ms. Lisa Bell, Managing Director of the Exim Bank. So you have a full team of senior officials with you here this morning, Chairman. We have sent through a very detailed and expansive brief, and the team is here to answer any questions and provide any further details required by the committee. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. I see a heavyweight team. Welcome all, especially for those who did not come with you last meeting. So let me welcome each member of your team. Members, we somewhat stopped at the Cannabis Licensing Authority last meeting. So I would suggest that we just pick up from there, and then we will move on to any other that there are questions. So members, I'm asking if there are any other opening remarks that the Cannabis Licensing Authority would like to make before we move on. None? All right, members, the floor is open for questioning.
Well, Mr. Chair, I think, as you said, where we left off last week was the Cannabis Licensing Authority, and the issue at the moment was Mrs. Faith Graham had indicated to the committee the level of transactions being taken by licensees up to then, and what was of concern was where are we in terms of the exporting capacity, the impediments, what are the things being done to overcome those impediments. Of course, it was highlighted too that one critical issue was banking and the inability to organize banking through the formal system, because banks are reluctant, in fact not reluctant, they are not engaging cannabis licensees to open an account or to do transaction in those businesses because of fear that their overseas banking partners, interbanking partners, would delist them, and that would undermine their other larger and ongoing banking activities. So the question is, what is being done, given that the whole licensing authority was structured towards that area, those opportunities there, and secondly, which I think was the more of the moment subject, was the smaller farmers in the industry. How are they being incorporated to benefit from the legalization of the growing of marijuana? One program I'm aware of by CLA that was that they had started was the alternative, what's the proper name of it? Development program or something like that, which is a grouping of small farmers. I know there were two groups from some earlier deliberations we had here. One is in the Orange something, I remember the proper name, in Westmoreland, and then there's the other one in a compound in St. Elizabeth that were, I think, the pilot projects which is to enable our small farmers who are the backbone of the ganja industry in Jamaica to be able to do their business in a legal way. I think on that latter point is where we would want the CLA to tell us where they are, because that has been going on for a number of years now in terms of that pilot, and we should have gone out of pilot stage into broad implementation activities. So for where I am to start, Chairman, that's where I would go in terms of the small farmers, and all of this, of course, is in the context of how do we emerge out of the economic downturn from the pandemic and creating opportunities for non-traditional business activities, for which the small farmers are one such group. Capsule on both.
All right, so I'll start with the small farmers. The Alternative Development Program was conceptualized and spearheaded by the parent ministry of the authority, now Ministry of Industry, MIC, and Commerce. The project ended with the onset of the pandemic. There were two communities which earmarked for piloting the project. One was Accompong Maroon Town, and the other Orange Hill in Westmoreland. We had seen a crop cycle being done by Accompong Maroon Town, and that program would have ended based on issues that the community were having. On the Orange Hill community that we had the sites on, that community was having challenges getting themselves organized in terms of land availability, and as such, that did not get off the ground. I would have to defer to the ministry for any further information on the Alternative Development Program, since it is really situated within the parent ministry. So I wouldn't want to speak any further out of turn when the ministry is here.
All right, let us.
Just one clarification though, Ms. Guerra. The program, what was the role of the CLA in that program? Because from earlier discussions a couple of years back, it was my understanding that the CLA was spearheading, and if my memory serves me right, you also had an officer in the CLA that was charged with leading that whole program. So right, even though the parent ministry might change, but my understanding is that your entity has an executing role in that regard. So you could
right, so
that?
The CLA supported that process with technical guidance. So we would have provided technical guidance to the farmers, to the ministry, and would have assisted with the monitoring of the program in terms of monitoring the farmers and so on. So therefore, there was a committee assembled within the ministry that dealt with it, and there was a member of staff from the authority who was a part of that committee treating with the whole Alternative Development Pilot Program. So the authority would have issued the authorization to allow the farmers to handle the ganja. Our employee would have been a part of the committee, and our enforcement and monitoring section would have assisted with technical guidance for cultivation and so on with to the farmers. So we played an integral but a supportive role.
Madam Pierce, would you?
So Chairman, let me ask our Chief Technical Director, who has oversight of the area in which that work is being carried out, Ms. Michelle Parkins, to give any further information and clarification. But let me also ask her, if you're agreeable, member and chairman, to speak about the mother farm concept which is being developed now, and other initiatives which are being looked at with respect to the incorporation of the small farmers in the system, and as well as the new task force which has been established for dialogue and for the development of further inclusion methodologies as well.
Except though, Mrs. Templer, I would want the response to be very pointed about that program.
Those two.
Right. Other than the broader pilot mother farm concept that you talk about. I don't want that to get lost in that.
If both would be acceptable at this time.
Fine.
Member, thank you.
Before answering, Member Hannah, you wanted to add to? Okay, let them answer first. Okay. Yeah, man. All right. You can proceed.
So you had asked also for additional plans to incorporate the small farmers. As I'd mentioned the last sitting, that the CLA had conceptualized a cultivators transitional special permit, which would allow small farmers to be able to enter into the license regime at 50% of the cost of a normal.
Sorry. I think what we wanted first, Member Jackson, was really a response, firstly, on the two alternative development, the two locations. And you went ahead to say that your agency had a supporting role to the ministry. Right. So what we want to hear is from the ministry now in its approach to that alternative development program with the two locations, Orange Hill and a compound. Yeah? So I think before we move to that other aspect of the small farmers, if we could just finish these two locations first. You wanted to add?
Mr. Chairman, whilst you're on that, the ministry could just help us to understand the motion that I moved in Parliament a few years ago as it relates to the assistance to be given to the very small farmers, because I remember clearly that the pricing for registration alone was a little bit out of the way for small farmers. But the motion was carried and taken, so I want to know what has been done since then where that motion is concerned or that instruction is concerned, so that we get an understanding of where the small farmers are and what is it that if they need to do something to get to that point, that we can pass information, because persons are still, I can tell you, Ted and Mikey is still asking me what is the situation, because they knew very well, they were listening when I did call a name into the situation. Yeah. So they want to hear from me what is happening since.
Yeah. But can we just finish the aspect of the two, the Orange Hill and the compound? Because as the ED said, that program came to an end, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. Now, what I would want to know, Madam Pierce, is if it is that there's any team working with these two locations to get them back on track, or is it that it just came to an abrupt end? So if you can just give us some additional information on that.
Chairman, colleagues, good morning. As was outlined by the CLA, there were two communities. It was a compound Maroon Town in St. Elizabeth and Orange Hill in Westmoreland. The project was an 18-month project, and that project ended in July of 2020, just about 4 months after the onset of the pandemic. There was, for the compound project, there was cultivation of cannabis, and there was the transfer of those cultivated products to downstream buyers, and the program did perform in that area. Especially for Orange Hill, that program did not necessarily get off the ground because there was the issue with the access of land. And up to the close of that program, up to the close of the time for the program, that land issue had not been resolved. And therefore, the program had not started in Orange Hill. notwithstanding, Chairman, there were some lessons learned as well from the program. We had some challenges, we had some issues, even though the program was effected in a compound. We are considering, as the ministry, the continuation of the program, continuation and expansion of the program, taking into account that the lessons that have been learned. The continuation of the program, though, has been delayed because we have had to direct in recent months the resources, financial, human, and otherwise, to deal with the COVID impact. And it has also been stymied by the need to interface and interact with the farmers on the ground, and because of the curfew restrictions and quarantine protocols, a lot of the work in that area was stymied. But notwithstanding, Chairman, we are anticipating a continuation of that program. We are anticipating that there are steps being taken to resolve the land issue in Orange Hill, and we are anticipating that Orange Hill will come back on stream once that matter has been settled. We are going to make recommendations to the Cabinet, and those recommendations are now being finalized internally for not only for the continuation and expansion of the AD program. So it is the intention of the ministry to continue with the program.
And when you say expansion, meaning?
To other communities, if possible.
Other communities?
Yes.
To be honest with you, I'm very distressed with that response. And that is putting it extremely mild.
Are you distressed?
Why do I say that, Ms. Parkins? The pilot, as I understand it, I think most of us understood it, was an attempt to integrate the small farmers into the formal ganja growing, cannabis growing activities in Jamaica, having recognized that the formal structure never embraced them sufficiently or satisfactorily. And that program, that pilot program, in 2 pilot programs, was designed to come up with a design that can solve that problem. You said it expired in July last year, right? When one is selecting pilots, the critical elements, the critical parameters must be identified to determine whether or not this is suitable for a pilot. Because there's no point in going into a pilot that has 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 critical elements and those are not in place before you use it in a pilot. It's doomed to fail before it starts. It starts. And that's the reason why there is distrust out there by the small farmers as to whether or not there is any sincerity in, or is any sincerity in that program. That is what my colleague from Central Manchester, Central St. James, spoke about in the debate that he piloted here in the House some time ago, that many of those farmers felt left out, and up to today, they are left out. And from what you reported here, Ms. Parkins, it would appear patently that there was no genuine, sincere effort to incorporate those farmers that he spoke about and the many others who were listening out and looking out for that pilot to be completed post-haste so that they could get involved into the formal growing. When you gave response, for example, COVID-19 and the pandemic, in the early part of the pandemic when the restrictions were imposed with the curfew hours, in this House, we had the order modified to include farmers because it was many of the MPs on both sides of the aisle then indicated that their farmers were complaining about not being able to attend to their crops and their animals. And the subsequent orders were modified to give exemption to those persons. So a farmer out there, they need to get something from RADA certifying that they are doing farming, and they were given the necessary exemption to be out there within the curfew hours attending to their crops and to their livestock. That, Mr. Chairman, is very unpleasant to hear, right? And it only indicates why these traditional farmers, many of them feel hopeless. And we talk about reopening the economy and giving new players and small players a place in it. Madam PS, if this is how we're going about it, they have no place in the reopened economy. And there's no hope for them if we accept the report that was given this morning as sufficient or acceptable. For me, it's not, Mr. Chairman.
No, Member Hannah, and then.
Good morning, PS. Morning, members. I want to agree with Member Jackson, but I want to go a little bit further. There are currently 50 countries in the world that have legalized the medicinal use of marijuana. The problem that we face is that we are way behind globally, and if Jamaica is to become a global supplier to the value chain of produced medicinal products, or even produce it here, what I read in your article from the CLA, which was published in the newspaper on the 29th of June, 2021, is that Jamaica was now becoming a global, there's increased demand for Jamaica ganja on the global market. But your headline was deceptive, because if we are to be a global player, you only have 19 customers at this time making orders and sales, and those numbers don't reflect an industry. So that's the first thing. Second issue that I have a problem with is that when I look at the data on the global stage, there are already companies like Cureleaf and Canopy Growth that have already invested, certainly for Canopy, $9 billion US dollars, and Cureleaf, which is another $7 billion in their cannabis areas. And when you look at the projections for the global cannabis industry, you're looking at projections towards $97 billion US dollars by 2026. The concern I have is that when I read the response and report that you gave, the other thing that concerns me about the ministry, which is a central in Ministry for Trade and Investment, is that you say on page 5, what was the amount of planned investment going forward, and you're forecasting. And, you know, the report itself going through, and even though this is for the BPO industry, what I'm looking at in the report is somehow there was still no foresighting as to what is going to be your long-term or even medium-term goal to create investment. And the reason why I am concerned about it is that the CLA is not being a facilitator to ensure that even the small farmers, and in 2014, when the Ganja Growers Association was formed, and there were over 3,000 members to that organization, what there seems to be happening is that the CLA is not looking at the cannabis industry as an industry in Jamaica from the start at the value chain, from production all the way to medicinal products which we can export. So that is why even at your export level, our export earnings are not going to go up based on what I have seen. And what I've also seen is that the same traditional exports that we've had, our major exports still in your report, and we've been producing rum for more than 300 years, is still rum. It makes up 79% of your export earnings for 2019. And so the major question I have, Mr. Chairman, is we can talk about pilot projects, but what is clear is that you're not facilitating, arranging yourself, and even being an organ that is going to create real investment and creating an industry. So tell me how you're going to create a cannabis industry in this country to meet the global standards that are going to be required, because right now, Jamaica's ganja is going to be trading at this, going to become a commodity without being able to attract real prices at the rate we're going on the global market. That is my question. Huh?
Would you like to
It is
respond?
over.
Madam
Chairman,
President.
perhaps before the CLA responds, I would ask the CTD to elaborate a bit on some of the work which is happening in the ministry relative to efforts to further develop the industry and to include others in the industry, including the mother farm concept. There's legislative work which is underway, which will also improve the business environment.
If I may, Mr. Chairman. And I should also add that the Safe Banking Act that was passed recently in the United States, what are we doing to facilitate that, if you're talking about in, legislation? Because it means that the banks in the States now will no longer punish people who are in cannabis industries, and you can have bank-to-bank transfers.
I'll ask CTD to comment on that, but it's not quite at that stage yet, member. It's heading in that direction, but not quite yet at that stage. But let me ask CTD to go into a little bit more detail with some of the development work, the task force which has been formed, and the way that we are looking to move forward. CTD.
Just on a point of order, and in giving those responses, it will speak to the questions I raised and what Ms. Anna just raised.
Yes.
Just to be clear.
Okay. CTD.
Chairman, I will first seek to address the issues that have been raised with respect to the AD program. Please recall, member, that the AD program was approved specifically for 2 communities, just 2 communities for a specific period of time. It was not a national program. It was approved for Orange Hill, and it was approved for a compound. The Orange Hill program, member, did not get off the ground because, remember, it's a community program, and the community members or the members of the Ganja Farmers Association in that area should have identified lands for the program to start. They identified lands, but it turned out that those lands were already owned by other entities, private entities. And so there was the challenge with respect to the land access. That group is still trying to work through the land access issue, and so there was and could not have been any program in Orange Hill.
What was the intent of the pilot? What was the intent of it? My understanding, unless I have it wrong, is that pilots is a small-scale operation anticipating a larger rollout. So if you intend to have a rollout but want to make sure you get it right, that's why you start with a pilot, which is the intention. When you run into problems with the Orange Hill and the Aponcom, right, that you can't realize what you want because you want to know the 1, 2, 3 ABC things that ought to do for other communities that might be coming on board. When you encountered those inherent structural difficulties like land tenure, land access, land ownership, all the issues relating to land, what was done now to say this one can't work? It won't enable us because you're on a trajectory, right? What was done? Is that we just do these things and then we'll give a report at the end and it doesn't really move the needle. Because what happened, what my colleague spoke about, is the reality of people out here who want to become formal growers. That is their everyday reality. And our reporting don't resolve that for them. It only causes their misery to continue, and we're not resolving their misery. That's why the discontent is there. I remember the energy. He's always energetic, but he was particularly energetic in that debate on that day. And others sympathize.
So remember, it is not that we would not have done anything to resolve the land issue. The ministry would have attempted to negotiate for access. Those negotiations failed. The lands were owned by private entities. Those negotiations failed. And so the group themselves, and remember it's a community project, so the farmers group themselves were to also, you talk about criteria, so they
Sir Chairman, on a point of order, sir.
Yes.
I keep hearing Ms. Parkin mentioning community project, even though Orange Hill is a community group. The mere fact that the national entity, the ministry or the agency got involved to use that community as a pilot project, it is not a community again. It is a national issue, because this is where the ministry is going to get the information as to how to treat with farmers or Salt Spring.
Yes.
So it's not community again. It's a national project. But you know, Mr. Chairman, from day one, from the time that I stood up and raised and moved the motion, I realized, and I will get flack for it, and I'm willing to take it. But I'm saying this today. The agency, CLA, was it formed to get us up to the international stage, or was it formed to keep us down? Because, Mr. Chairman, all that has been done is not to move the industry forward enough. All that we are getting, Mr. Chairman, is how to beat the small man down into the ground. And it cannot happen. Jamaicans have paid their price in the past, and therefore the apple is about to be picked. They must get their fair slice of it, their fair share. And they are not seeing it. Mr. Chairman, can you imagine the headlines this afternoon and tomorrow morning when all of that disinformation is now out in John public? Mr. Chairman, we can't continue. Right now, and I'm going to raise it because I have some information and I want some pertinent answers today.
Let them answer, because Member Hannan also answered. You can continue.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. So I will move to the other programs, Chairman. So as I explained before, the lessons learned from the AD program is being taken into account in reviewing the continuation of this program. That's one of the efforts or the activities being undertaken by the ministry. Secondly, we are looking to roll out what we call a mother farm concept for the cultivators' transitional special permit license. So the cannabis regulations and the legal officer can speak in more details to the amendments to those legislations. But we are looking to develop what we call a pilot program, a mother farm pilot program for the transitional permit, which is supposed to be taking the small farmers and to align them with a larger buyer and to allow them to be able to qualify for a permit, for a Tier 1 permit. The CLA can go into detail as to what Tier 1 permit means, but to allow them to qualify for Tier 1 permit. Right now we are developing the framework for that program, and we are looking to begin in about 6 or so areas. As I said, it's preliminary, and we are just beginning to put the frame together for that program. We are also, Chairman, setting up in the ministry what we call the Ganja Industry Development Task Force.
Let me just get down. So is it that one of the larger farmers will somewhat subcontract smaller farmers to provide to them?
Yes. Yes, Chairman.
And let me just say, Chairman, that is within the context of very strong directive that we have as a ministry to ensure that we move quickly to put arrangements in place. So I understand the concerns that have been raised before, member, but a lot of work is happening, including the development of this concept, including the amendments which are almost finalized to the interim regulations and so on to facilitate more readily the work of the industry.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, that urgency is more in the pronouncement than it is in the action.
Member, I'm going to let her complete first, because you have a list of questions and I don't want you to lose it.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to lose my train of thought. Mr. Chairman, please. Am I hearing correctly from Madam Pierce and Ms. Parkins that the contractor, the registered farmers, subcontract works to smaller farmers?
That is the intention.
Yeah, man, in a farmer then be.
Yeah, that's the intention.
Are the small, those subcontractors, are they licensed with the CLA?
No, which is what they're working on now, if you heard. that is not
Chairman,
even in...
I need Ms. Parkin to just address and the PS to address something, because there obviously is a glitch in the communication either between the CLA and the policy formulation between the ministry. And the reason why I ask this and say it is simply because Ms. Graham from the CLA has publicly said that the CLA is not or does not have the responsibility to determine the quantities of cannabis that is produced or the export markets. They're merely facilitators to grant licenses. So I don't know if the ministry on one hand is creating mother farms and going into agriculture, and also what role does the Ministry of Agriculture play? Because it seems to be that everybody is responding to some notion of an industry without really trying to facilitate or be the persons who are going to be building it. So you all have to come here and tell us explicitly what is being done, because we are so far behind.
All right, Ms. Parkins.
Thank you, Chairman.
Please.
To answer your question, Ms. Hannah, the ministry has just established a Cannabis Industry Development Task Force. That task force includes members of the industry. It includes the Ganja Association representatives. It includes academia. It includes public sector. It includes private sector. And it includes several government institutions, including the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries. The task force, as I indicated, is to be that, and the task force is chaired by the Minister of State in the ministry. And the task force is to give critical attention to the developmental focus of the industry. Where are the gaps and how are we going to fix those gaps to position the cannabis industry to become one of the leading industries in Jamaica, to increase its exports, as well as to position itself for when the legislations are passaged in the United States, to be able to put our financial institutions in a position now to support the industry. So it's
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. So it's quite a comprehensive task force. The task force will focus on things like what policy and legislative amendments need to be either adjusted or new ones put in place. The task force will look at capacity building, and capacity building particularly for the small farmers. It will look at what it is that we need to do in terms of inclusions of the small farmers, and to develop programs specifically for that inclusion. It will look at investments in the sector and export promotion, and JAMPRO is an integral part of that task force as well, to look at new export markets and how it is that we can capitalize on those export markets. And the task force is also to develop public awareness and public education around the program.
Before member, and the conversation is interesting. because, you know, it is. And why I say that is because we generally create entities within government to be regulators, and regulators only, and they see no other role but to regulate. This is a new industry for Jamaica. And yes, you see that the ministry has a part to play, but the authorities' role is really to regulate. But then we don't get the feeling, I don't get the feeling, that there's any part of government that is trying to grow the industry. Yeah? And I think that is where the gap is. So the ministry is trying to do its part, but then you have a Ministry of Agriculture, like Member Hannah mentioned, who is into production. And I don't see where the Ministry of Agriculture is in this, because they have, through RADA, have the experience of bringing community groups in, doing greenhouses, or coming together to play their part in production. And why I say that is because when you look at the figures here that you have sent to us, read cannabis products and weight volume for each cannabis product exported from Jamaica from November 2018 to May 2021, 853 kilograms. That's 1,800 pounds. That is not an industry in the wider context of the cannabis industry worldwide. And I mean, if you check the numbers from the Ministry of National Security, how much weed they have held from and destroying, it is probably 10 times more of what we have exported. And what I would have been expecting is that we would try to get persons from being in the legal activity to the legal activity in growing the industry. And it is growing, and believe me, it is distressing, because what we're getting is regulating and not growing of the industry. And I mean, this information that we're getting now, and I mean the one with a compound and Orange Hill, is distressing, because those were the two communities that came out that we would have used as a pilot. But yes, it finished in June of last year. There's no guarantee that the cabinet is even going to go further with a pilot project. We've seen investors come to Jamaica and get cane land to build houses. So why we can't then facilitate them in Westmoreland in giving them a plot of land to grow? Because as you say, remember, it is no longer a community project, but it is a national project, and it should have been to the interest of the government to see it succeed.
So, Mr. Chairman, we can safely say that the regulation that were put in place, the interim regulation, really not regulating to lift the industry, but rather strangling the situation.
But to be fair to the authority, they can only regulate with the laws that they have been given to regulate.
And that's why I said the interim, and that's why I said the interim regulation, Mr. Chairman, the interim regulation. So the ministry need to look at what they have, because it's certainly not growing the industry. And therefore, they can suggest amendments as they see fit. Whilst, Mr. Chairman, we have to look at it. There's no way, and you rightly as you say, 1,800 pounds from start to up to now. And when you hear the police make a fine, it is how much tons? So where are we going, Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman,
members, look at the last page, because
I want to just add to
before. I want to understand. Is it that the agency is still looking at the medicinal cannabis as illegal? Because to me, to John Public, that is not illegal enough. I don't know if it is a mindset of many that it is illegal ganja or illegal cannabis that is being used for this situation. Some monies that I hear that is invested in these products, you know. If you did do a bed and breakfast, you know, you make 10 times the amount already, you know, Mr. Chairman. I just want to, and you know, one of the question I want to ask though is, who staff the CLA? Are they staff members from the security force? Were they drawn from the security force? And what was the idea of getting them from the security force, if there was a reason for them for that situation?
As if they have employed them from such member. So that,
Chair, I just wanted to add to the point you made relating to the number of exports we've had vis-a-vis the number of farms that have been destroyed. Because when I do a quick search, the international reports are saying from as far back as February of 2021, Jamaica faces marijuana shortage as farmers struggle. And there is one in April of 2021 saying Jamaica experiences shortage of marijuana. So to me, the industry is declining. I don't see there's no alacrity in relation to the response from the ministry or the CLA to respond to these critical issues. And prior to COVID, there have been complaints from persons within the industry as to how they're treated by even the CLA. You know, you make an application and it takes forever for things to happen. So it has been a concern, not just now and not just because of COVID. It has been a concern from the get-go.
All right, Ms. Graham would like to respond.
Before Ms. Graham speaks, I've picked up 3 sets of questioning. One deals with regulation and what's happening with regulation. The other has to do with development. And then the third has to deal with export. So
yes,
as we do our responses, perhaps we need to look at it within those 3 envelopes.
Yes.
In terms of regulation, there is work being done now to revise the interim regulations. And that work is well advanced and has been done in conjunction with industry and taking into consideration the challenges that might have arisen as a result of some provisions in the current regulations. I think one thing that we always have to bear in mind that it's a new industry, and the regulations would then have been new regulations. So you have to revise as you go along, as you see the challenges and the issues that arise.
I'm going to allow you, but let the PSS come.
So I think both Ms. Graham and our legal officer can speak to the issue of regulation.
All right.
There's also the issue of export, which I think Ms. Graham can speak to. In terms of development, I think the ministry, the CTD and myself can speak further on the matter of development.
Yes, Member Siblings.
Just follow up to the regulation that Madam PS has mentioned. I want to know in terms of when. Is there a targeted date to complete these regulations? I keep hearing consistently, soon, we are doing, but I want to hear targets. You know, when the expected date, is there a target to complete? Because from I've been in this house and been on committees, especially the Joint Select Committee, there have been targets that are set for us to complete certain legislation, certain rules, and so on. Why is it that when I hear from civil servants, I am not hearing target date? When is it that we are going to do? And if you look, Chairman, on page 26 of the document that was submitted to us,
yes,
I am seeing total exported, but I'm not seeing what was the target. Was there a target?
No. Remember, it's not government who sets a target, because these are private entities. But
no, Chair, what I'm talking about, listen to what I'm talking about. It is government don't set a target, but government, in order for us to achieve certain things, what is it that we were hoping to achieve? And yes, I'm saying, where is it? Where's that number? And because if we operate in a vacuum, as to we don't have a number that we are trying to achieve, then we will not be able to facilitate those persons who are going to achieve it. If we are seeing that we have the persons who are supposed to do the export not reaching the target, what can we do as government to enable this target that we have in our mind in order for the country to grow, to increase? I'm not getting that. I'm not sure if the answer lies here.
Okay.
Can I just ask Mrs. Reed, who is our Director of Legal Services, to speak with respect to regulations.
Sure.
Mrs. Reed.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. In terms of the export regulations, we are very advanced, so I'm expecting that we intend to finalize, I would say the latest by September, and that is a far deadline. So it could be as early as August. There is already the draft regulation. The Attorney General's chambers have reviewed and have given their comments, which we have incorporated. And so the regulations are being tidied up by the OPC. So we expect after that the minister will be able to review and sign off. So I would say between August and September. The interim regulation is also advanced. And so those, I would give a similar date of the August-September range. The new proposed legislation that CLA will be speaking on, those, once we have received the final proposal, which would inform the legislative drafting, that cabinet submission would be prepared and that work commence. So she will speak to what is being proposed at this point. But those have not started because that would support the mother-father or the special permit for the small farmers that is in developmental stage. So as soon as we're at a point where a cabinet submission can be advanced, that work will be done.
So in terms of the interim regulations, Chairman, similar to the import-export regulations, those have been undergoing the sort of review and development process that happens in government. Because as you know, they have to go to the Attorney General's chambers, they have to go to OPC, and there may be other areas of government that need to comment. But the interim regulations are extremely well advanced.
No, that's the point. Because is this the regulations that should have followed the tabling of the original legislation?
No, there is already interim regulations which is allowing things to happen. Okay. And even in the absence of export regulations, using administrative methods, exports are being facilitated. Okay. Right. But what these regulations, what the revised interim regulation will do is address some of the shortfalls that would have been found, improve the facilitation and work of the CLA and the business environment within which the licensees would operate, as we have gone through the process and have seen where there are areas of those interim regulations that could be modified within the context of, it is a legal industry. We are seeking to facilitate, to make the process as smooth as possible.
Mr. Chair, with your permission, I hear your PS. Firstly, I would like for that, if we could be provided with the TOR for the task force that was referenced earlier on, so we know exactly what is it that they are tasked to do, and if any accompanying timelines are provided for in that TOR. So if you get the TOR for that, it would be useful. Back to the regulations. I hear PS and I hear legal officer spoke about what was being done with the new regulations and those timelines looking for as early as August. Mr. Chairman, we have a new and emerging regulatory industry. Industry is not new, but the regulation for it is relatively new. Many challenges. I would have thought that in the interim, there would be some interim provisions to deal with issues arising where an entity, whether it is the CLA, whether it is some special unit in the ministry, or wherever else it is located, that could deal with issues that are emerging. Since the area is new, you never know all that is involved. You discover things along the way. But have an institutional provision to deal with these issues as they come up with some amount of expediency, some amount of alacrity. Because what you end up having, even when I look on the last sheet about the export, these are not really export. These are sample quantities. You talk about 853 kgs of ganja flowers and seeds, 3 kgs and 32 liters of ganja oil. Those are not, I wouldn't even refer to them as exports.
All right,
The point I want to make with that, Chairman, that I would love for the PS to give us an intimation. You ever hear them say, while grass I grow, house I starve? While we are perfecting the process, while we are making it proper, what, if any, provisions are there to deal with those licensed entities in the industry who wants to go ahead, if there's any such provisions?
Yes. Before you go, Mr. Sibley, because we've been waiting a long time for Ms. Graham to respond.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just speak to each of the issues as I touch on them. The CLA was established to regulate a legal medical cannabis industry, and as such, we issue licenses, permits, and authorizations. We enable the industry with whatever it is. We move with the pace of the industry, or at least we try to. Now, the authority falls under, of course, MIC. I'm here, and in carrying out our mandate, we do, in fact, facilitate. Now, PS spoke to the amendment to the regulations, and the beauty of the regulations is that they're interim, which means that they were never meant to stay. So what I want to just put a little context to everything. The authority was established through the DDA in 2015, and these regulations were promulgated in 2016. The first license was issued at the end of 2017, and therefore, the very first production cycle that Jamaica saw within the legal regime was in the middle of 2018. Now, because before that, there was no way for us to have known before now, or at least a year later, that the regulations would have needed to be amended because we had not seen all the license types being fully operational. Now we have a greater appreciation for that, and we also listen to the industry. So what we have done, we have identified some areas within the existing regulations that can be amended in the shorter term so that we will not have to wait until all the consultations that are necessary to overhaul the regulations are done. And through the ministry, we are moving full speed ahead with that. We believe that these quick changes will augur well for trading within the industry. The matter of the small farmers, I want to just put some clarity to what was stated earlier. The cultivator's transitional special permit is actually another avenue that gives us for entry into the industry by small farmers, subsistence farmers, and traditional farmers, bringing them from illegal to the legal regime. Now, it is a very broad policy which actually allows these farmers over time, 24 to 30 months in the original policy, to incrementally matriculate to becoming a full licensee, cultivators tier 1. As we all know, the legislative process within Jamaica is long, and therefore, what the ministry is seeking to do is to extract a part of that policy, the transitional permit policy, which allows for a shared economy, and under which falls the mother farm system that you would have heard about. what the ministry is trying to do now is to, while we wait on the regulations to be promulgated, by the way, the regulations for the cultivations transitional special permit are being drafted. And while we're waiting on that, the ministry is trying to pilot one aspect of the permit, which is through the shared economy, the mother farm concept. Now, I think it is important for us to recognize that some of the challenges that face the industry are not here at home. There are some global challenges that impact the industry, and we can't ignore them because they are real. Earlier, someone mentioned the banking situation. Now, this banking situation is not specific to Jamaica. This is a global issue. And we have to bear in mind that Jamaica has a legal medical cannabis regime. We do not have a recreational regime. We do not have an adult use regime. We have a medical cannabis regime. Now, cannabis, as much as we hate to hear it, it is scheduled as a Schedule 1 drug and a Schedule 4 drug. What is good and promising is that it has now been removed from the Schedule 4, which means it is now being legitimized as medicine. And therefore, with that change and the changes that are apparent with the Safe Banking Act, we are trusting that that will redound to more confidence in the banks. Minister Shaw has always lobbied for banking issues and to try to find solutions. We have even, the ministry and the CLA have met with the banking community. And whilst they would have indicated that they are not opposed to the industry, the fact is that they operate under regulations that cause them to have correspondent banking relationships. And in an effort to preserve those relationships, they are de-risking, and therefore they do not support cannabis businesses right now because federally it's still illegal. However, as I mentioned, we are trusting that with the recent changes in the Safe Banking Act, it will actually come to fruition so that that can happen, because our cannabis farmers or cannabis stakeholders are not able to open bank accounts. They are not able to access financing. They are just not able to. This is not something that is domiciled within the CLA or the ministry. It is something entirely outside of our control. What we can do is prepare our industry players through facilitating with the amendment to the regulation, with the creation of new policies to help them to advance even as we await these changes in the global space. We do not exist in a vacuum. We have to realize that these are real challenges. We have had applicants stuck at a conditional approval stage. Reason being, they are not able to access financing. Now, so we're hoping with the changes that these things will together, the descheduling as well as the whole change in the banking sector will help as we go along. Now, we spoke to the export conversation. As I mentioned when I put to you the context of the CLA in terms of its establishment and when it became operationalized, I did it for a reason. Because what we need to recognize is, and I want to just state clearly that based on our research of the other jurisdictions, we never had a lot of export markets that are so open to be wanting our ganja. What is happening now, having been operating and having gone through several cultivation and production cycles, our licensees have now, one, started to test their products locally. That's another challenge that faces the industry, because right now the authority, what it did was to establish an MOU with the Bureau of Standards, the Scientific Research Council, and the University of the West Indies to facilitate these testing. Now we realize that some of our licensees cannot tap into certain markets because some of these, the testing that are required for some of these jurisdictions is not offered. So we recently added Mines and Geologies division to it for the heavy metal testing. we were able to tap into the German market, which is one of the highest standards. Standards is the other thing. It is very important. The Bureau of Standards promulgated 7 standards for the industry, but that was done just last year. So the industry, while it may seem slow, it really has been, it's developing over time. And so we have to recognize these things. So what can we do in terms of waiting for the regulations? We are building new policies. For instance, we recognize that the authority now operates under a system of a closed loop system where trade can only take place within the closed loop, which is between licensee and licensee, CLA being the facilitator in the middle. The figures that you would have seen, those figures represent what is traded among that closed loop and nothing else. It does not indicate to you what is sold to a patient at a retail herb house or what a processor might sell. It does not indicate that. Also, we would not have the figures from inception because we started to track this amount in 2019. So I'm just putting it into perspective. So I understand what you're saying, that the numbers seem small and that they are reflective that there's no industry, but there is an industry and it is growing, though incrementally. So I think it is essential for us to have the understanding of these fundamental things before, so that we don't leave here with a misconception that nothing is happening. We don't want that to be said. So for instance, I go back to the closed loop system. Somebody mentioned, what can we do if it is that the regulations are stringent and we can't do certain things without it? One, the quick amendments, which still take time. We are also looking at a new policy where we could allow for trading outside of that closed loop system. It is something to come. What this will do is enable growth of the industry, because what will happen now, we will have our licensees being able to trade outside of that closed loop with a manufacturer per se, right? A manufacturer per se. However, again, it is important to note that the Ministry of Health and Wellness is also a regulatory body. And so when even having done this policy, then the Ministry of Health will come into play down the road, because the authority regulates the extracts, the inflorescence or dried buds, and the resin of the cannabis plants. Once it is mixed and it becomes something else, then it falls under the Ministry of Health. And as such, we have been partnering with the Ministry of Health. We have been having meetings so that we can get this thing going as another area where we can boost the cannabis industry. So we are not sitting idly by and twiddling our thumbs. We recognize the challenges, and it must be stated, we were here because of COVID. COVID really had an impact on the industry. I would have stated those figures the last time, and they are real. We have had licensees who temporarily closed down or temporarily scaled down. They have reopened. We are building back. So I just wanted to clarify some of those issues.
Member Sibley.
Thanks for the clarification, Ms. Graham. In fact, they are indeed helpful. And while the questions were being asked and the answers were given, it dawned on me that the CLA is a regulatory body. And I am thinking that we need to have a next body chairman that deals with the investment and growth of this industry.
Excuse me, sir. Actually, I just forgot that little part. Through JAMPRO, through our ministry, our sister organization, they do that in terms of seek the investments and so on.
So in essence, we are talking to the wrong group of people, because the CLA deals with regulations, and they, based on what Ms. Graham and Ms. Parkins have been communicating to us, they have been communicating within the limit of their scope. And in essence, Chair, we need to really be talking to the JAMPRO side to understand the whole business of the investment and the growth of this industry. And maybe there is some sort of conflict and it needs to be cleared up and cleared up quickly, Chair, so that we can have the CLA doing the regulatory part as an agency in charge of that. And I don't know which department over JAMPRO that does the investment and the growth element to really be here to talk to us with regards to that.
Just to say, Chairman, that JAMPRO is a member of the Cannabis Task Force, which has been established and which is looking at the development of the industry. And so they will be playing a role, and a very strong role. They're actually involved in every subcommittee of that particular task force. In terms of, there was comment about a unit to respond to various issues as they arise. So within the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce, the industry unit has direct responsibility with respect to this particular portfolio. It may be time, Chairman, in actual fact, that a separate unit be looked at for cannabis and for cannabis development. I think that is something that perhaps needs to happen so that there is a dedicated group, especially because this is a new and growing industry. I could see that there could be merit to a dedicated group of persons, and it's also a complex industry.
It is.
And there is need for deep knowledge and understanding of the international market, of the regulations. Remember that we are not just going forward talking about cannabis itself, but there are medicinal byproducts which are under consideration for development in various forms as well, which is based on my limited discussion with the industry, an area that they are anxious to see the industry grow. So you start talking about infused water and various kinds of edibles and so on, which is sort of where they see a lot of the growth coming in the industry. So it could well be that a separate unit with responsibility to grow and to work towards the growth and development of the industry is something that perhaps need to be considered. But in the interim, right, a unit in the ministry. And of course, with close collaboration with JAMPRO, because JAMPRO's role in terms of export development, I think, is critical, because it is an industry with independent individual commercial entities, but there's a country marketing from my experience at JAMPRO, which is very important in terms of helping to inform international markets that Jamaica is now in this business and in this business in a established and robust way. So I think, you know, there perhaps is need to look at some new arrangements, but just to say that the task force we expect will come forward quickly with many of these recommendations. The task force is
there a time frame for that task force to come with a report?
The task force had its first meeting about 3 weeks ago, and the work plan for that task force is the next action, which is to come forward at the next meeting, CTD, perhaps in July or August, in 2 months. So there's 2 months for that task force work plan to be developed.
Member Sibbles, you want to?
Chair, with regards to the Orange Ale project that was mentioned earlier. It just underscored the point that we have the regulatory body managing that process, so to speak, when it should be a next unit in the ministry, independent of the regulatory body. Because that to my mind, because I just couldn't understand why the answers were coming the way it was coming. And that is simply because they are the regulatory body.
And that point was made earlier.
Right, and it should have been a different unit that should have been managing that process, to my mind. Within the
that point is well understood.
I think that point is taken,
Yes.
Chairman. There is, as I said, the industry unit in the ministry currently.
A relook has to, because there has to be an entity that helps to grow the,
right,
apart
and that
from
unit has
regulating.
other work that they do and would not be able to give sort of the dedicated attention. So I think we are agreed that and
I'm happy to hear that. Go
a
ahead,
unique unit would be important.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to ask the first question, and I hope that either of the PS or Ms. Graham will be able to answer. What is the cost of administration per annum for CLA?
Let me have CLA answer that question. They'd have that information more readily to hand than I would have. CLA, Mrs. Graham?
I don't have the figures offhand like that. Just repeat the question, because
What is the cost of administration per annum for CLA?
the cost of
Or better
administration.
yet, the budget for CLA.
Okay. All right, our budget, the budget that we have is 423 million.
423 per annum?
Let me just look at my notes here because I don't know it from my head. Yeah, the figure. All right, for 2021, it was 254 million, and we had projected AIA at 45. For 2021-2022, we were fortunate to have gotten 423, and we estimated the AIA to be 32.5.
Do you have the information for 2019-20? You know, Mr. Chairman, where I want to go is to paint the picture of the monies that are given to CLA to grow an industry that is so needed, to give them the same funding for them to continue. But the regulatory body who is in place to administer, I don't think that they're doing enough. I don't think they're even scraping the bottom to start, Mr. Chairman, to make the industry grow. I have done an investigation since I am the one who moved the motion, and I have been watching the industry somewhat, Mr. Chairman. And I ask a question. When a license is expired, do you give or issue an extension, and how long that extension is for?
Yes, sir. When a license expires based on our regulations for cultivators, an extension is given to facilitate the crop that they would have had in production already.
Do you visit these sites on regular occasion to make sure that those farmers or those farms are within the ambit that you need them to be?
Yes, sir, we do. We have an enforcement and monitoring section within the authority, and someone had mentioned earlier about the makeup of the team, the CLA team. Yes, there are some of us who are of security background. However, we do have a mix of skill sets to include a unit within the enforcement and monitoring section, the cannabis specialization unit, which are trained agricultural persons, agronomists, agricultural specialists. We have biochemists and data analysts, engineers, lawyers, all different kinds of skill sets. And this division is the largest division within the authority, and they monitor all of our licensees.
So for one farm, within a 3-month period, how many times is it required for members of your team to visit that particular farm? From
the top of my head, I wouldn't be able to give you something accurate, but what I can say in terms of the number of visits per farm or per operation, but what I can say is we monitor all the activities of the licensees, whether in person or remotely.
Mr. Chairman, I am well aware that each plant is registered with your entity, right?
All right, so let me clarify that it's not that the plants are registered with the CLA. Each licensee, and that's a cultivator, and this is not a practice that is specific to the CLA, it is a global practice within the industry where ganja plants are tracked and traced from seed to sale. And what this means, how this is done, is that each plant is tagged individually with a unique identification.
To register. It is a form of registration.
So it is held now on that licensee's inventory.
So, Mr. Chairman, what, in my opinion, if that plant goes missing on one of the visits, then the farmer or the farm would have to give an account for that plant. Mr. Chairman, my question through you to Ms. Graham. Why is it that it would take 5 months for those persons from her entity who are tasked with visiting farms to make sure that everything goes accordingly? Why is it that it takes at least 3 months for those persons to find out that something is wrong at a farm to say to them that they have to get rid of those plants?
I'm not aware of what you're speaking about, sir, so I can't respond. I'm not aware of what you're saying.
You're not aware of it?
No.
All right, I'll give you the data for that. Sure. Mr. Chairman, the farm that I visited and interviewed somewhat is one farm, Epican Medicinal Limited. Are you aware of that farm?
Yes, sir, I am.
That is the farm that I'm speaking of. So I can present you, I can have the information pass you as what is taking place. Mr. Chairman, again, listening to Ms. Graham, I have formed the opinion that we need to drastically, Madam PS, we need to drastically look at CLA. That money, I know that they have been in existence more than 4 years. So if we multiply 4 times the figure that she gave to me,
I'll just add them up.
Just add them up. It takes you over $2 billion or more. But have we gotten that value? No, we have not. Is there a light at the tunnel to say that, yes, somewhere down there, we are going to be seeing value for money? No. I'm not seeing that, Mr. Chairman. I'm very sorry. That is my opinion. And so the ministry must look at CLA. If it means that we need to scrap it, then it needs to be scrapped. Because it's foolishness taking place. Mr. Chairman, when you speak to farmers, as I did, you hear some horror story, you have to wonder. I am told of one acting director of compliance who is God unto himself in the agency by virtue of his behavior. Because he tells, it is alleged, he tells the inspectors when they send them out what information they must bring back.
Chairman,
No, but
Chairman, may I speak to that?
No, before you go, remember, you have to be careful. Yes, please. You have to be careful in how you malign individuals who work with these agencies. Please.
Right. Thank you, Chair. You know, I was about to say to the gentleman, I'm sorry, sir, I don't remember your name, but yes, Mr. Clark. Yes, I'm aware of Epicon, but I hardly believe that this is an appropriate forum to ventilate something of the nature of the business of the licensee. And I really do take issue with your pointing to a member of the CLA team and singling them out on a fabricated statement. And I do not appreciate it, sir.
Yes, but member.
But you did not present it that way, sir. So I'm cautioning you.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman.
No, member.
Mr. Chairman.
Member.
I did make mention of the word alleged.
Yes, but
meaning.
You mentioned the title of the individual, which is, yeah. So I'm asking you to restrain yourself on that one, please. All right? Yes. Go ahead, member.
Let's shift focus now, Chair.
Thank you, Chairman.
I have two questions. One, we got the figures for the exports, the number of exports that we've had since the inception. On the CLA's website, I see where you give retail licenses, facilities for consumption, facilities without consumption, and therapeutic. But I haven't seen any figures to indicate our local consumption. Do we have anything there to track and trace our local consumption of the product to date? And two, is there any business model for development housed anywhere within the ministry or the agency that will help to guide the industry?
Ms. Graham?
We haven't tracked local consumption outside of the closed loop. That is something that we have just consulted with the licensees. That information should start coming into us as at the end of this month, and we'll start there in terms. And when I say outside of the closed loop, I mean from those retail herb houses to the patients, or as well as what the processors might be selling. And yeah.
On that note, though, Mr. Graham, last time you were here, you gave some figures on the sales.
Right.
In the collection of that sales data, is it only in dollar sales, or you don't have volume associated in that data gathering?
The volume of cannabis produced? Yes. Oh, yeah.
So would that able to address the question raised?
No, because the thing about it is this: if you look at the figure, when I spoke the last time, let me just refer to those notes. We would have seen a decrease in the number of harvests and so on, and the number of seeds sold. And you wanted to know if the sales, if the production figures, where the last page?
So you only have the figures for the closed group?
Right. So for 2019 to 2020, what was traded within the closed loop was above 894,000 US dollars. However, in the report, you would see a notation that tells you that the data started we started to collect that data in May of 2019, so you would not have gotten a full financial year. And therefore, the production would have been 518,000 grams. In 2020 to 2021, the total sale, that is a financial year with COVID, the value was traded within the closed loop was 627,000, and the production was 1,550,000 grams. And even though the sale figure might be less and the production is higher, that is as a result of the fact that the data was not being collected prior to May 2019, and therefore we would not have been able to give you the full details for the financial year. So we'll get a more true reflection of the value of the industry as it is now once we are able to get those figures in from the industry players.
But why wouldn't you be gathering that information from before? I think it is just a matter of the development of the authority, because we at the time engaged our data analyst and we had strengthened our research capacity. So we remember the organizational structure has moved from 17 over time to now 50 something. So we never always had the capacity to do that. So we had built out the structure, strengthened our research, brought in a corporate planner, brought in a data analyst, and then we started to do that, activate that process of data gathering. Up until this point, you really don't have a value of the local?
Not fully. We can only tell you what's within the closed loop system.
Yeah, so the answer is no.
So as I'm saying to you, we will not have a true value until we hear what is being sold outside of the closed loop.
Yeah. That's really an indictment both on the...
It is an indictment.
Yeah, on both yourself and the ministry. That you have an industry which is a growing industry and you really don't have... or
you don't
what we have
1 to 2.
as such. What? All right. Well, it's better to be late than never, Ms. Graham. So.
Chair.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Chair. I have a second. The second question hasn't been answered in terms of the business model.
Oh, the business model. Madam CD, would you like to answer that?
Chairman, as we would have pointed out in the session, the industry is an emerging industry. There was an early developmental plan for the industry that needs to be revisited, and it's one of the things that we will be asking the task force to take a quick look at so we can refine it, and then after that we can share it.
Yes, Mr. Witter. Go ahead. You want to switch?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mm-hmm. I've listened to the discussion that we have been having since the start of this meeting, and I am kind of convinced that we're really not getting anywhere. I understand the concern raised by most members as it relates to the development of the industry. But what we are seeking to do now, as I think all of us here today, is old enough to know that Jamaica has had a very lucrative ganja industry over the years. Very lucrative industry. And we are now seeking to, though being illegal, we are now seeking to transition into a legal framework. But I believe that we are going to have a serious challenge, given the fact that we are putting in some very stringent measures to regulate the industry. And the demand that Jamaica has over these many years in terms of the illegal industry is in relation to the recreational market. Under our new dispensation, we are now seeking to tap into a medicinal market. And I don't believe that the demand in that area is as big as the recreational market. And that is what Jamaica is known for in terms of ganja production. We are known for producing the best ganja for recreational purpose. Though being illegal, yes. But now that we are trying to formalize, if we are going to succeed, I don't think we'll be able to succeed until we are able to tap into the recreational market. Ms. Graham mentioned that she is now seeing some light in terms of international regulations.
I'll just clarify, the government's policy position is strictly a medical cannabis regime. What I had said was that oftentimes we compare our local medical cannabis industry with other jurisdictions that have the recreational industry or adults.
That's the point I'm trying to make.
Right. So
it is going to be difficult if we are not able to tap into the recreational industry, because that is what we are known for. And until then, I don't believe, I think the question raised by Member Clark will always be raised until we, cross that hurdle. I don't know what is in place so far in terms of our intention and to look in that direction. But I really believe that we won't be able to keep raising these questions as being raised by members as it relates to the ganja industry until we are able to tap into the recreational market. And therefore, I think that is the direction that we must seek to go. I don't see the medicinal market. That's my view. I don't think we'll be able to compete. And the small farmers are producing, because we mentioned earlier in the discussion that police is still able to confiscate thousands of pounds of ganja. That means it is being produced, but we are not able to, in the new framework, we are not able to produce more than 1,800 pounds. And therefore, that is where the challenge is. And I think we have to look at that and see how we can, overhaul that hurdle. That's my observation.
All right. Thank you, Member.
Just on a quick comment, Chairman and Member, there are a lot of implications in terms of international obligations and possible sanctions and so on in terms of the recreational market that would have to be considered. But an expansion of the recreational market would expand sales in Jamaica. Now, when we're looking at export, the recreational market would not necessarily help in terms of the export market. It would perhaps help in terms of tourism, with more persons being able to come into the country and being able to enjoy Jamaica's brand of marijuana. In terms of export sales would now be dependent on the restrictions and regulations in the receiving markets, and not so much with respect to the local market and marijuana.
Miss Parkins, you had mentioned about the mother farm program or concept that is now going to take off.
Being conceptualized.
Being
conceptualized.
Yeah. My information is that 3 years ago, such proposal was made regarding the mother farm concept. That was made to the ministry on that program 3 years ago.
I'm not aware of that, Chair, Member. I'm aware of a mother farm concept being put forward for the larger agricultural sector. Not
for
specifically
cannabis.
for cannabis.
Well, that is the information I have coming from the sector.
Members, I think we went top and bottom and inside out in this one, and I don't think I don't think there is any member that is happy at the deliberations itself. But what is obvious is that there's a lot of work to be done, and I'm hoping that Madam Pierce and members of the team, that you look at it in a broader way, in how it is that we can get not only just more players, but more streamlining of the industry itself.
Mr. Chairman, the point has to be made, though, and this is pertinent to the PS. One of the reasons why your minister was brought here is that we recognize in the Parliament the fallout in the economy from the pandemic, and that the small, medium-sized businesses must get serious attention if we are to recover and come out stronger. What is pertinent about the deliberation with CLA this morning is that it's symptomatic of a bigger issue as it relates to small and medium-sized players who want to get into the mainstream economic activities of the country. And that's where the urgency lies.
Well, yeah.
Not just in the cannabis industry. Yeah. Because if we take the similar approach as we've seen in deliberations here with cannabis in other areas, then it makes our recovery.
Well, members, I want us to move on, but I would say to Madam Pierce is that we'll be paying great attention to this one and to see the steps that are being made in growing not only the CLA but also the industry itself. All right? It's unfortunate that the wheels of government move as slow as it is while the rest of the world is moving away from us. But I'm hoping that the date that you gave, Sutherland Reid, that we will have those regulations sooner than later. And I hope it is not similar to the Road Traffic Act itself, the regulations, which is 3 years in the waiting. So, yes, Madam Graham.
Just a last comment, Chair. A member had asked for the previous year's budget.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2017-18, we were given 55 million. And 2018-19, it was 100 million. 2019-20, it moved up to 161, and then there are the figures I had given. So what it does is underscore what I said about the capacity that needed to have been built, which happened over time as the budgetary allocations increased. Thank you.
All right, yes, last comment.
So, Mr. Chairman, getting this information shows us clearly that the more CLA get is the less work we get out of them. But that's for another meeting.
Member.
What I want to ask, true.
No, go ahead.
What
ask
I want
question,
to ask,
yes.
and I asked a question before, I'm asking it now. Who monitors the subcontractors? Are the subcontractors guided by the same regulation as the farmers themselves?
All right. Sure. Go ahead, Member.
My final question to the ministry.
And
yes.
please, Madam Pierce, to be able to give us follow-up reports on this.
I had asked earlier, and Ms. Parkin spoke about the Development Task Force. But my final question, we know where we are, and we understand that the production of cannabis products by some of the small and medium-term operators are taking place. What plans does the government have, as I asked earlier, from the start of the value chain, from the production end? Is Jamaica going to be producing end-use value-added cannabis products that we can see perhaps like we see in international supermarket chains, topical creams, CBD, lozenges, those kinds of things? Are we going to be structuring the economy and the industry to make sure that persons can produce for export, so that we are not only focusing on the production side, but we're also getting to the end user side. So Jamaica is seen as an industry that is a value-added cannabis growing industry.
Ms. Hannah, I'd ask Ms. Graham to answer that in detail, but my understanding is that that kind of development work is already happening by licensees, and that there are companies that have the equipment and facility and capability to do that, especially in terms of export, and then that again becomes a question of the receiving market. There is also a discussion as to having that kind of product go into the local marketplace as well. In other words, are companies able to produce topicals and so on that would be sold in the Jamaican marketplace? And we are in discussion with the Ministry of Health and Wellness because medical products, as you know, would be under the control of the Ministry of Health and Wellness. So just recently, within the last 2 weeks, for instance, there has been follow-up meetings with the Ministry of Health and Wellness looking at what would need to be put in place, how, what are the requirements, the processes and so on for such products to be sold, which are produced here in Jamaica, to be sold in the local market. I believe at this point in time there is some such which are already licensed with some provisions that they are sold in pharmacies, but not just generally for sale in the marketplace.
If I may, PS, and before Ms. Graham answers, the production levels are small in terms of quantities. What I'm trying to get to is when are we going to get to the volume of export to fill containers that leave the country and not just pallets or one pallet or two pallets in a container. The other issue is that you have a help desk, I am told, at the Ministry of Health, and there needs to be, and maybe Ms. Graham can speak to this, a more consistent operation between your ministry and the Ministry of Health. If you want to fast track those regulations, then the Ministry of Health, and I understand it's on the task force, but there really has to be buy-in from the Ministry of Health. There has to be an obvious acceptance that this is going to be something that is going to be a major industry in the country, and let us try and fast track it. And if we can get those timelines, and just to say that I know Minister Dunn is really trying to fast track. I've had several discussions with him, and I understand where he's at, and he's trying to put those coordinates and plot them in a way that we all get to the same finish line at the same time. But I realize that the coordinating mechanisms, it is, especially with the Ministry of Health, needs more force to get it there. So I'm asking you to answer, Ms. Graham, in terms of the production for export, because when I went through your document, we're not getting anywhere in terms of that.
Before you answer,
before we speak about the production side, in terms of the mechanism and the arrangement with the Ministry of Health, let me just say that the discussions are happening now at the ministerial level, minister to minister, and that the Ministry of Health and Wellness has a cannabis unit in the standards and regulations unit. But in ensuring that we begin to drive that process, the discussions are happening at the ministerial level.
Perhaps maybe you can speak with some of the players who are producing, because they say to me when I ask them about it that they're experiencing gaps there, and that's as far as I'd put it.
So what I will ask, because I would love us, we are coming close to the end of the meeting, and I would at least like to hear from Companies Office and Exim Bank. So if we could compile the question from Member Hannah into the follow-up report, because I think it is a critical area. Because looking at some of the shortfalls, some of the challenges that the CLA would also be facing in dealing with the export market and some of the challenges for the local market, and why we have not grown into where we expect that, or Jamaicans expect the industry to grow. Because it's not our intention to bring you back at the next meeting. Yes, also including the TOR for
the action force.
Yes, yes. All right, so Madam Ramlogan.
Good afternoon, Chairman. Good afternoon, members. I don't know if you have any questions, or I did have a statement that I'd like
I'll allow you to.
Okay, all right. So I just wanted to report that at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, the company's office experienced a marked decline in the number of customers attending the offices. However, for the rest of the 2020-21 financial year, customers attended the COJ offices in levels not seen before, right? It appeared that persons seized the opportunity presented by the pandemic to start their own businesses. During the year, the COJ attended to 58,000 customers at both its Kingston and Montego Bay offices. This represented a 7.8% increase over the total number of customers seen in the preceding year.
Increase?
Sorry, yes, an increase.
Repeat that figure, repeat.
Sorry. So what I was saying that for the 2021 financial year, we saw 58,009 customers at both its Kingston and Montego Bay offices, and that represented a 7.81% increase over the total number of customers attended to in the previous year. That number was 53,802. So the company's office introduced the electronic business registration form for new business registration in April 2018 and company registration in August 2019. Utilizing the form, customers are able to incorporate companies and register business names online. They no longer need to come to the office or to ask a bearer to deliver the documents. The take-up by customers was initially slow since the EBRF was new and there were issues with the software in relation to company incorporation. However, the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 saw more customers using the online registration service. The number of company incorporations completing during the 2021 financial year amounting to 3,959, 3,719 inline, and 240 online. The number of incorporations undertaken during the year represented a 4.27% increase over the numbers registered in the previous year. It should be noted that there was a 1,276% increase in the number of companies registered using the electronic business registration form during the period when compared to the previous year. The top registration category for companies was construction. The business registrations completed during the same period totaled 12,863, 9,577 inline, and 3,286 online. The number surpassed the previous year's figures by 1421 or 12.4%. As with the company incorporations, the use of the EBRF by customers wanting to register their business names increased significantly. During the 2021 financial year, 3,286 business names were registered using the EBRF, which represented a 258% increase over the number registered in the previous year. The top registration categories for business names were bars, restaurants, and canteens. So in an effort to assist customers during the pandemic, the COJ also introduced the following initiatives. So there were staff dedicated to providing greater assistance to customers who wanted to use the online registration system, but were having difficulties doing so. There were earlier opening hours so that customers could conduct business with the office in a less crowded environment. There was the utilization of the electronic drop boxes at both offices in which to deposit documents. Most services were converted to drop-off services so as to prevent crowded conditions. There was also the relaxation of document completion and execution protocols so that rejection rates were lowered. For those companies who wanted to close their companies and business name, the closure requirements were lessened. This allowed for customers to more quickly and easily finalize their obligations with TAJ and the other regulatory agencies such as NIS, NHT, and HeartTrust. Thank you. I don't know if anybody has any questions.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Very interesting set of data, Ms.
Ramlogan.
I note in the latter part of your report, you mentioned about the increase and that the names most popular. And I chuckled, bar and so forth.
Right. Yeah.
But the reason I chuckled is twofold. One, earlier during the pandemic, the government instituted some care packages for businesses. And I wanted to know if there was any correlation between the increase in those registration in order to better access those facilities, or whether or not those increases represented new business or existing businesses that are in operation but now formally registered. Because one of the value in company registration is a sense of indication of new business activities. But if it's existing before, but informally, Joy's Bar, but not registered, but no registered as such, it doesn't represent a new business activity. It only represents a new business registration. So I don't know if in your data collection, in terms of these registration, if it reflected if the business being registered was in operation prior to, without being formally. So that's, as I say, if you have that information, it would be very, very instructive if you could provide it. The question I have, Chairman, is what is the change in you have had a long list of companies that have been dormant, right? They're registered, but they have been dormant. So you look at the registers, have low lot of companies, but good amount of them are dormant.
Right.
Could you give us an indication of the level of active companies, and how they differentiate between registered company and active company, and what the dormancy level is like for the registered companies? I know you mentioned about those that can come off the register with great ease, but if you could just shed a little light on that, it would be useful.
Well, dormancy, in Jamaica there is no legal term dormancy, right? But inactive is that, for us, inactive is that you haven't filed documents in, say, 2 or 3 years, right? But there might be companies out there that are active, but they're delinquent, right? So we're having a little difficulty deciding, whether they're, looking for companies that are doing activities, but not complying with their registration requirements. And one of the reasons why we're having the difficulty in finding those companies is that companies are supposed to file a registered office notice with the company's office, and as if they move office, they're supposed to file, but they don't. So you might find that they're on our books, they might be inactive because they haven't registered while they're out there doing business. So our compliance officers are trying to track those companies, but we're not having a good time of it. And what we have, I've just gotten some data about the companies that have not filed annual returns.
I was just going to ask you that. In the number of companies you have registered nationally, what percentage do actually file?
Well, I just got the figures, and it seems that it's 30% of companies that are registered that have filed annual returns. But what I want to say, though, is that we need to classify them, because there are companies on our register that have not filed for 84 years, right? What are they? Those should be removed, because obviously they're not doing any business. So what we are going to be moving towards doing now is classifying the companies according to their delinquency, and then for the companies that have annual returns that are outstanding for the longest, those are the ones we need to remove from the register. Because what we have sometimes you see happening is that a company that does not file an annual return for 2 years they will be removed because we can't find them, right? So we really have to change the way that we go about removing inactive or delinquent companies. So as I said, yes, 30% looks bad, but when you reclassify them, you'll see that most of those companies have not filed annual return. Most of the delinquent companies haven't filed annual returns for years and years and years. So those are the ones that we need to remove.
So what percentage then of the total amount then you would have classified as inactive?
Well, what we have to, because we have just been looking at the data, so we haven't gotten around to that yet. What we have seen is that out of all the companies that we have on the register, only 30% are filing, right? So what we have to do though is try to, instead of so as I said, classify them. Yeah, so the ones that are 10 years and under.
Because they say you have a company with 50 years.
Yes, right.
But it's so still on your books, but you would use a classification if you have not done anything in 10 years or 15 years, then you can say they are inactive. So you're doing that activity now.
Yes, because what we know is that companies, all right, so most people, when they register their companies, even though they get an information package that says you need to file an annual return every year, they just forget about that. So what we need to do really is follow those, like if you haven't filed in 2 or 3 years, what we have found is that if we follow them up and if we help them, they will file their annual returns, right? So that is what we need to do. So we need to make a decision and say, okay, if you haven't filed in 10 years, the possibility or the probability is that with some help you will file. But if you haven't filed in 20 or 30 years, the possibility is that you are inactive.
What would prevent you, just like the tax authorities, in sending a notice?
We do send.
You do.
But
as
how
many of those come back?
Right. And that is a problem as well, in that, well, I don't know if in other government agencies this happens, but once you send a notice, right, a registered notice in an envelope, people just ignore it. So it comes back to you as unclaimed, right? Because they think it's taxed or some government thing. So what we have to do is find other ways, not sending them the registered office, not sending them the registered mail, but going to visit, finding them some other way. And as I said, the RO, the registered office notice, is a problem as well.
But I would imagine that some of these companies would have banking activities that there needs to be some join up to finding, because there needs to be a cleanup of the registration.
Yes, there needs to be.
Role.
But banking activities.
How many companies you have on that are registered?
I would say 120,000. I think that's where we are now, 120,000. But that includes companies that have been removed.
No. Understood.
Yes.
Understood.
Yes.
Including those that have been removed?
Yes. No, so they're on the register,
Yes.
They're on the register.
Yes.
But we cannot, all right, so when you're registered, you're put on a register. If you are removed, you have 20 years to be reinstated. So they're always on the register, yes. I know, Chairman, you spoke about banking activity, but remember, banking information is confidential.
No, I understand that, but the point
but there's some joined up. There's some joined up government.
Right, there ought to be some joined up
because
government.
Right now because when you register a company, you're registered for taxes and that kind of thing. So we do have your TRN, and there's a link between us and tax office. So if you're paying taxes, we can.
And the reason why I said, because we like to come inside here and make grand announcements that we have seen an increase in registration of companies, but then probably only 20% of those registered actually have any activities going on. And then we come back here another 10, 15 years, and we are hearing the number still increasing, but there's no cleaning up of it. So it doesn't give a true representation of those who are actually within the system, paying taxes, filing. So when we go to JBDC and then ask the question, she will say, yes, we have X amount that we're actually working with, but how many of those outside of the system that we are actually bringing within the system is where I think that we need to go. And similar to how we're discussing about the cannabis, in getting them from illegal to legal. So that is a broader piece of work that needs to be done in cleaning that up, seeing who it is that you can bring within those that are registered but not paying any taxes, not filing, but they still have a company name or trading as that you get within the system. And I tell you the truth, because I've always said that when they send coming from the taxes authorities and they say the penalties and outside of the principal, they look at the penalties and late fees, it frightens them.
Yes.
So they tend not to want to come in to settle, because just seeing that total figure, they prefer to go underground instead. So when they see it coming from you, they figure the same thing is coming to them. How much the penalties and the late fees that's coming to them. So there has to be a way and I'm not saying that we are facilitating the illegal activities or the avoidance of taxes or filing. But things tough out our road.
Yeah.
It is.
I just want to say that we are on a drive now to remove 3,000 companies that are inactive every year, right? Of course, that's not enough, but that's what we can manage. And we also want to we have introduced an easy way of filing annual returns, status quo annual return, which is really just saying that nothing has changed from last year to this year. So we have done that, and we are also, once we have smoothed out the online registration system, the next thing we're going to be doing is annual returns online.
And maybe it is something that JBDC can look at, because when small businesses have to employ an auditor to help them to file these things, it is an additional cost that they can't. So they prefer to not file, to incur that cost. So it is probably a service that can be looked at, Madam Pierce, within your organization in assisting at probably a reduced cost. Because otherwise, especially in the middle of the pandemic, it is good. You probably might see a quarter of those small and medium-sized entities filing.
Just to say, Chairman, that we, as a small business, you don't need to file audited reports with the COJ. So you don't need to file it with the COJ. I don't know, for taxes, they might.
But the assistance in doing it, because a lot of them don't even understand the paper that you're giving it to them. So it's just a suggestion in looking at that.
You had some amnesty program.
Right, yes, we do have an amnesty program, but it has to do with removed. If you want to remove your company, ordinarily, you would have to file, you bring your documents up to date, file all your documents, so no, and you'd have to get an audit certificate, so you'd have to go to an auditor for him to say that you have no assets or liabilities. So with the amnesty, no, you don't have to file any outstanding documents, and you'll just self-declare that you have no assets or liabilities, and that's it.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for Companies Office members? All right, so thank you very much for appearing a second week in a row.
Chair.
Yeah.
I don't have a question, just a comment for the Companies Office.
Sure.
I must say that it is one of the more efficient entities in government, and I just want to encourage you to keep on doing the good work.
Thank you so much.
But can you also just keep us abreast of the process and how it is, working for you in
the inactive companies? Yes,
because it will give us a
compliance.
better understanding of where we are, and I think it is something that needs to be done moving forward.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. The Exim Bank.
Good afternoon, members, Chairman. I don't have a statement, but I was coming to expect questions, but we'll just give some comments based on what I understand to be the subject of the review today. Let me start by saying that development banking, if it was important before, it is even more important in the context of the pandemic. Exim Bank is a development bank. In 2020, we set a lofty target of hitting $6.2 billion in loan utilization, which is our central key performance indicator. In essence, how many loans we make to the sector. However, with the onset of the pandemic, we saw that that could not be achieved as the sector really went into shock. As we all know, the SMEs were who are our largest target audience, were disproportionately affected by the pandemic, and a large percentage in tourism and tourism linkage sectors. So quickly we kind of recalibrated and moved into what we call relief mode. Relief mode being where we could, within our portfolio and beyond our existing portfolios, to provide assistance. So in many cases, we provided payment moratoria, meaning a deferment of principal and interest payments, and or restructuring of existing loans. In some cases, particularly in tourism linkage sectors, those entities were able to benefit for almost a year's moratoria in payment. This was what we had really understood based on our looking at the global best practice, was what was required and quite frankly continues to be required. In other words, extending loans on softer terms that will allow for survival. So our first focus was on survival, trying to make sure that as many companies were able to survive for as long as they could. Unfortunately, not all will and not all have. We've seen some entities closing in more specific sectors. As it relates to, so we ended the year about 4.6 billion, but interestingly, not only focused on relief, but to try to support areas where we saw opportunity. As you know, crisis, the other side of crisis is always opportunity. So we saw growth in food, the food sector, in the healthcare sector, in chemical productions, and in fact, interestingly, in one of our most important sectors, export opportunities emerging because of changing consumer patterns. And I'll come back to that. So we closed the year seeing a downturn in the amount of loans we were able to get, closing the year at about 4.6 billion. But this year we have switched gears and starting to focus, yes, on relief, but also now on recovery. There are some sectors that are showing some light, and we want to be prepared, our sectors, our players within those sectors, to be prepared for the recovery, to not wait till it actually hits. So by way of example, occupancy rates in the tourism sector are going up quickly, and we want to make sure that all the linkage sectors that are related to the accommodation subsector are also prepared. We've had a program, as you know, for about $1.5 billion that is targeted to the tourism and its linkage sectors. As at today, we have still about $600 million available. So we've been on a campaign, and we'll ramp up that campaign to make sure that money gets into the linkage sectors. It is at historically low rates, 4.5%, 25 million, and is targeted at SMEs. So that is but one of our interventions. Through the ministry, we've also recently been allocated some additional funding, which will ultimately be about $675 million to be allocated to over this financial year, which, like the SMTE fund, will be targeted towards SMEs at 4.75% and will have similar terms for engagement. We've also used the opportunity to strengthen our stakeholder engagement. So we're working with the PSOJ and the JMEA the JHTA on the private sector side, as well as on the public sector side with JBDC and JAMPRO, in order to promote initiatives relating to export or specific industries that have opportunities to either emerge or to thrive post-pandemic. In terms of technical assistance, we continue to engage with the PSOJ in terms of access to finance. I know it was just mentioned some of the issues that SMEs are having and exporters are having. So the Export Max program is one we partner with to provide financial support for those entities getting development assistance. We also are looking towards opportunities where we can engage SMEs in new opportunities. And by way of example, if you'll bear with me for a second, yesterday evening I got a call from one of our consultants, partners who've been working in the private sector to help small businesses promote their products internationally through the international platform. Yesterday, Amazon finally gave Jamaica country status for promotion of their goods. It's a big deal. It's a big deal because it means, as I always say, that a small producer producing castor oil in Clarendon can get access to Amazon with all its supports because the country has gotten a designation. That's an emerging opportunity, how we can digitize, help our small businesses, exporting business, meet the standards that they will have to meet to take advantage of opportunities in the international marketplace. So that's something we're working on to help to engage them. We have launched a couple of new products recently that are aligned to the needs of the sector. Receivable financing, small businesses can't get the money, the complaint is out, they can't get the money on the road, so we've tried to find a way to provide financing to ease the cash flow burdens. We're also looking at we launched an export guarantee product, which also is to give support in partnership with private financial institutions to extend financing to exporters. And we're about to launch our e-commerce loan, which is very timely in the context of the Amazon announcement. So I think this year has taught the bank that it needs to be flexible and more responsive because the needs are changing and changing daily. We have begun to apply more flexible techniques in providing financing. We talk about cost for audited statements. Only recently our board took a decision that we will provide financing for companies to get their audited statements done, because we recognize one of the hindrances to being able to access financing is they don't have audited statements. So we've had to back up and look at what solutions are required in order to improve access to finance. As well as to revise soften some of our credit approaches. So this year we have a target of 5.6 billion, still lower than I would like, but it is based on how much funding we have. My perennial call for more funding to this sector is well placed. But I think there is a need to continuously strengthen this sector, because, I was just reading recently, we can take the approach that we don't want to do it because there may be more defaults and our country rating may decrease, but historically, countries who take that approach actually fare worse off because later down they have too many closures and the time to rebound takes too long. So that's our focus for this year, and I am hoping that with some more support, funding support, we'll be able to do more.
All right, let me just say that we have gone over our time by 12 minutes. The Hansard team needs to go and prepare for an online meeting too. So I'll allow...
Yeah, I just have a couple short questions, Ms. Bell. You said your target was $6.2 billion. 6.3 thereabouts.
6.3 in the previous year.
But you're now down to 4.6.
We achieved 4.6 in last financial year. This year, Our target is 5.6.
I would assume that if you set a target of 6.3, that you would have identified the funding for it. Therefore, you have that capacity.
Yes, we have, but it is much lower than we have done in previous years. But 5.6 is what we're hoping to get in the context of the funding we have.
Okay. Funding you have, so the demand is much more than that?
Yeah, I would think the demand is much more than that, and will be much more than that as the economy begins to rebound.
What's the demand you have right now?
We are believing that we will hit the 5.6 hopefully by the third quarter. I'm hoping. But it is a very, very dynamic environment. And as I said, tourism turned around in a couple of months. And we see, unfortunately, some of our practitioners waiting until they actually need the money. So it's hard to estimate.
But go ahead.
So on that note, on the demand, Ms. Bell, in the report, you have over 866 million, call it $867 million, and they break it down in sectors. But I see no distribution between the SMEs and the other, which I'm more concerned about, the larger ones. My question lies in my concern to what extent the larger players are crowding out the smaller players, and to the extent that you have a funding challenge. The question just asks about demand and your capacity to absorb that demand. Give us, if you don't have it here, we'd love it to provide it, that distribution.
Easy.
Okay.
About 98% of our funding goes to SMEs.
98%, okay.
We are not as strong in terms of our cost competitiveness as rates come down, unfortunately. So larger entities access from the traditional financial sector, always have. In times past, we've had some large companies in the portfolio, but it really was to balance out risk.
Okay. And you lend directly to them, to the small.
100% of our lending is direct.
Directly, not like DBJ who
Absolutely.
Okay.
Our lending is very direct. It's all direct. So we're very close to the issues that SMEs face on a daily basis.
All right.
My last question, Chair. What's the distribution between import and export?
Kind of hard to say because most of our importers are exporters also. So, but I'd have to get back to you on the specific number. But many of our exporters import some raw material. Yeah. And therefore, I couldn't say.
My question, the basis of my question, Ms. Bell, is really to get a sense of you facilitate import as an Exim Bank, as I said, and you export. Which side of the market are we? Your portfolio is more lean towards. Is it for primary exporters? As I said, some of them will import.
No, I would say that it has because the country's exports are dominated by large traditional industries like coffee, etc. We only focus on non-traditional exports, first of all. I would say not enough is directed at exports because there's a lot of capacity building that needs to be done in the exporting sector. But I want you to understand also, we look at the whole value chain of export. So it's not only exporters that we support, it's everybody who produces a good and service that would support the exporting sector. Because our country is not sufficiently developed to look at just purely on exports. You have to look at the value chain.
And your exporters will import raw material for export, I get in some instances. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, unfortunately, and I think the Exim Bank with the JBDC, the correlation, strengthening of the JBDC with the Exim Bank to grow the small and medium size, because I think one of your reports showed the amount of small and medium sized entities, and as Vera had mentioned at the last meeting, the amount of new players that you have engaged But it would be interesting because we keep on saying, just as a buzzword, that it is a small and medium size that will grow the economy. But we're not seeing the same rate of them entering the formal sector. And if they're not entering the formal sector, then you're not growing at the rate that you need to. So I would love us at another time to spend more time on that industry itself and the growth of it, to see how best we can facilitate from where we sit the growth of the small and medium-sized sector. But I want to thank you again, Madam Pierce and the team, for coming a second time. There's still a lot unfinished business, but at a later date, you have some questions, some follow-up reports that should come. So I want to thank you again and the team, and have a great rest of the week.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Members, we're next meeting, which is to be next week, Wednesday, July 14th. We have the Ministry of Justice, Ministry of National Security. The Minister of National Security has indicated that they will not be able to come to that meeting next week because they will not be in a position to give additional data that was asked of them. The Ministry of Justice had indicated that they had accepted the invitation. So do we wait until we have the Ministry of National Security and twin both of them, or we bring the Ministry of Justice and get... Because I would imagine that we would end up spending a lot of time on the crime numbers with the Ministry of National Security and may not even attend upon the Ministry of Justice. So do we bring the Ministry of Justice, get that over with since they have accepted, and then we deal with Ministry of National Security? Yeah? Agreed? Okay. Next week, no, well, we don't have a date for Ministry of National Security as it is, because the following week is supposed to be Heart Trust NTA that will come to the committee. Sorry? Coming back, we have... No? Yeah. Right. So we had asked some questions, which has been, and the information has been circulated. So I hope members go through those reports. For Heart, yes, it has been circulated. It was circulated from last week. Yes, it was circulated. All right. So members, the date of our next meeting is next week, Wednesday, July 14th. So I move for the adjournment of the meeting. All right, thank you, Member Hamilton and my dear Carencia. Thank you, members.